Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Henry, and I'm back to discuss part two of Schumer Stopped the Democrats from Crashing Out. Now, at the very beginning of this, I thought this was going to be a one and done discussion, but the more I got into it, the more I realized how truly educational it is, and I'm realizing that many of us can learn a little bit better what Trump is doing, his tactics and strategies. And that in turn can help us understand how to create tactics and strategies to counter what Trump is doing. So let's jump into part two right away. In part two, I highlight another scholar who understood that Schumer made the right decision in avoiding a shutdown. In the verdict, Neil Buchanan discusses why Schumer was in the right. But he doesn't stop there. He offers some significant advice. And let's just look at the title of this clearly. Schumer was unfortunately right, but either way, the infighting must stop. But check it out. Before we get into this, there are two things you should know about Buchanan. One, he has a PhD in economics and a PhD in law. And second, he is not a fan of Senator Schumer. And so he can care less, really, if you want to vote against him, primary him, or whatever. He is just speaking from a scholarly perspective, a research perspective, right? That's where he's coming from. Now, here are the main points that Buchanan is putting out in this read here. One, a shutdown would have been much worse than the alternative. Two, the understandable progressive suspicion of the Schumer wing of the Democratic Party. Three, yes, the non-Trump world needs to do something, just not something stupid. And four, the infighting must stop. All right, so we're going to get into each of these one at a time. So let's start with the first one. Here we go. So part one of this essay is a shutdown would have been much worse than the alternative. Why does Buchanan say that? Why does he say the shutdown would have been much worse than the alternative? Well, Buchanan reminds us that when the government shut down, Trump can just allow laws to take their course. And that means the government will be required to reduce the federal workforce, and Trump can insist that the reduction is sufficient, that reduced workforce is sufficient, and there's no need to bring back workers. Buchanan also notes that government workers required to work during the shutdown won't be paid. All right, so that's another hardship that's going to happen. And that's going to, I'm sure Democrats will try to use that as pressure to bring Republicans back to the table to make a better deal, because people will be screaming like, wait, oh my gosh, I got no money. I can't do anything. We can't pay bills. What's happening here? And so instead of, taking on the blame, Democrats feel that Republicans will say, okay, let's fix this. However, check out what Buchanan brings to the table. He sees that, and this is the most detrimental consequence, that Trump and Musk will have no reason to even agree to any legislation to reopen the government ever, because a president's discretion is much wider during a shutdown than it is at other times. So a lot of people, I've been kind of going back and forth on social media with some folk on the left who are saying, oh, Schumer made a huge mistake because a shutdown would have put pressure on the Republican Party, on Trump, to come back to the table. Not realizing, the shutdown is where he can soar. It's where he can excel. It's where he can actually enjoy a lot of privilege in deciding what's essential and non-essential, along with the law helping him do that. He has surfed that wave. From these insights, Buchanan responds to Senator Tim Kaine, who opposed Schumer's support of the CR. In fact, he used Kaine's own reflections against him. For Buchanan, Kaine acknowledged, perhaps unwittingly, why a shutdown is worse than the CR bill. So King pointed out that Trump was losing some court battles and that supporting the CR endorses Trump's cuts. However, Buchanan responds, King seemed to think that voting for the CR would amount to an endorsement of lawlessness. But that has it precisely backward because judges can only rule that Trump has violated a spending law if that spending law exists. So, if there's no spending law to hold Trump accountable, what do you think Trump's going to do? If you think things are bad now, you have no idea what he would have done then. And the fact that there is a spending law, the courts have something to go against because the president is still restricted according to the budget and the agreed cuts. Granted, those cuts are horrifying, but they are limited. All right, they're not that much worse than the previous CR bill. Worse, but not what he wants. So people kept saying, "Oh, Schumer gave Trump everything he wants." They're not living in reality. They don't understand what Trump wants. Trump wants the entire country. He wants to be a dictator. He's trying to get rid of the federal government and even its branches. So we'll get back to that. So now let's move to Buchanan's second point. And this second point is important, very important. He understands the suspicion of the Schumer wing of the Democratic Party. He's a progressive himself. So he's okay. Like he's telling people, yes, I get it. But however, he's also reminding people not to be self-righteous. Okay. Buchanan regards himself as a progressive, and he readily acknowledged that suspicion of the moderate, centrist, or corporate wing of the party is warranted. He even calls out Nancy Pelosi for dissing Democrats when in 2022, she supported an anti-abortion Democrat in Texas. However, he keeps it real and calls attention to the time the House Progressive Caucus hung a true progressive challenger in Ohio out to dry. That would be Nina Turner. Now, let's just fast forward to the more of this particular point. Sometimes the default postures critical of the status quo or normative positions are wrong, like in this case. So people think, just because they're on the left and they're thinking like this is how we would do things, they think that they are right about the situation. Not all the time. And in Buchanan's words, yet rebuttable presumptions are sometimes rebutted. And in this case, I found myself surprised to end up on Fetterman's side and, more importantly, happy that Schumer was willing to take the heat for doing the right thing. Again, this is a progressive who can actually care less if Schumer is reelected. But as a scholar, he's bringing out critical details that are important in this fight. Okay. Now, let's get to Buchanan's third point. I think this is probably my favorite. Yes, the non-Trump world needs to do something, just not something stupid for the sake of doing something. And I think that this is where the issue was for I think all the House Democrats. You know, they understood that their constituents just wanted to see somebody fighting and speaking up for them. And everybody's like, what are you doing for us? Fight back. What are you doing for us? Fight back. And so they felt like, you know what? Let's just show defiance. And I'm here for that. Yeah, we want to show defiance. I want my representatives to stand up to Trump. I'm never Trump, right? However, not at the expense of truly giving him what he wants. And so Buchanan comes, and he, explains himself here. The left must not fall for meaningless acts of fighting Trump, or worse, losing sight of political insight and losing the appetite for facts and truth. Like that's what he's expressing here. He declares that his agreement with Schumer is not motivated by the fear of doing something bold. It is founded on the rejection of doing something that necessarily gives Trump the biggest advantage. That's where the rejection is. So in his own words, he says, if this were a choice between caution and boldness, I would have welcomed a strong dose of boldness. So if there were no facts on the ground to support the idea that, hey, a shutdown would be bad, and it's just about, being willing to stand up to Trump and endure and weather the fallout of the voters who might say, hey, we don't like this situation. We're going to blame Democrats and we're going to blame Republicans and you guys are not doing enough, whatever. If it were just a matter of just enduring that and doing something that isn't politically expedient, he's like, yo, be bold. Just say no. But this was really about the actual harm that could be done. So, again, at the end of the day, people's frustration with Schumer comes from the fact that Democrats did not have much to fight against Trump's agenda in the first place. I mean, that's what he expresses, and that is also what, I observe. Like the Democrats, they're just outnumbered. They're outnumbered in the House, they're outnumbered in the Senate. We don't have nothing in the executive branch, and forget the Supreme Court. All right. So now the final point, the infighting must stop. This is a great point here as well. It's probably the most important point because it's like we're not going to get anywhere where if we're just like kind of, cannibalistic. But there's much to say about this that I'm going to do in another video. Okay, so Buchanan argues that even if he were wrong and that Schumer was a traitor, people need to move past that and focus their energies on being proactive. He writes, but imagine that I am wrong about everything that I have written above, which would mean that Schumer betrayed everyone by giving Trump what he wanted, which again is not at all true, no matter what Trump might say publicly, and that everyone in the non-Trump world is fully justified in their anger. The only possible response would be, get over it. We simply do not have the time or the energy to continue to fight this out among ourselves. Now, this reflection is particularly useful because the right is fueling the infighting among the left. Okay. Also, I'm witnessing people posing as progressives trying to discourage Democrats by framing Trump's current agenda as the result of Schumer's alleged betrayal. No. Trump is in office because his MAGA crew voted for him, because some progressives voted for Jill Stein. Some, Hispanics, a large percentage of Hispanics voted for Trump. A large percentage of women voted for Trump. Even people who are pro-Palestine voted for Trump. So if you want to take anything out on somebody, take it out on those who are supposedly on the right side of history and looking for progress any means necessary, but for some reason couldn't stomach voting for Kamala Harris and say, you know what, I'm going to throw in the towel or just give Trump my chips. That's who you need to go for. I mean, because you already know what MAGA is going to do. The MAGA code going to do what the MAGA code is going to do. So Schumer voted for Kamala Harris. Like if she were in right now, all this nonsense that we are seeing, the threat of a fascist state would not be current news. All right. So as you can see, I'm really motivated by this piece that Neil Buchanan wrote. So at the end of the day, let me give Buchanan's final words here. Perhaps Schumer will in fact decide to go away. If so, I will not miss him all that much, for all the reasons that I noted above. But if he is pushed out for having saved everyone from their own uninformed enthusiasms regarding the CR vote, he will at least be able to leave with his head held high. No matter what happens to any one politician, however, everyone who opposes Trumpism needs to remember who needs to be stopped. Wailing for days on end because the government was not shut down is not going to make the world a better place. All right. That's where I'm coming from. Okay, so listen, keep your head up, keep pushing, keep fighting, stay informed. We cannot risk losing critical thinking and holding that intellectual virtue of wanting to be informed and understand what's happening around us. Okay, thanks for listening. If you have any questions or reflections, please feel free to drop them. This is your boy, Dr. Henry. Stay tuned for more. Don't forget to like and subscribe, share this video, chop it up with me. Peace and love.